the way forward. I think the way that we can, if I can be so bold, the way we can approach this new way of interpretation is through a phenomenological approach to theology. Well, welcome back to the Monday Muse. It's been a while since we did this, but I thought we would start it back up again and just have a segment on the podcast where we talk about musings. So not from the readings necessarily. There might be some overflow, but we have our Friday episode that we talk about the readings, but then we'll have the Monday episode where we just talk about ideas that we're cooking up or baking or ruminating on, and various other maybe cultural happenings, intellectual happenings that we want to jump in on the conversation. So let's dive into today's episode on the theology of disclosure.
Let's go.
From Robert Sokolowski. So I was reading a little bit of Jung as I do, and this is from Jung's letters with Father Victor White, a collection, and Jung offers Father White some advice, and he says that you cannot preach to a man who does not understand your language. To shout and to repeat makes no sense, but you feel as I do, that the theologian ought to learn a new language. What if St. Paul had talked on the agora as if he were in the synagogue? Understanding begins with the individual mind, and this means psychology. It is a gigantic task indeed to create a new approach to an old truth. The old way of interpreting itself has to be interpreted. Indeed, this is a big task, and I think the way forward, the way that we can, if I can be so bold, the way we can approach this new way of interpretation is through a phenomenological approach to theology, or the theology of disclosure, from Robert Sokolowski. So, what is the theology of disclosure? So, he says that it refers to how God is disclosed, or how he, another way to say that is how he is made manifest in human thought and in language without becoming just an object among other objects. This is something that really distinguishes Christian revelation from pagan religion, is that God reveals himself as something other than the world, that he's involved with the world, but he is not dependent upon it, and he's not a creature among creatures. Many of the pagan deities are in some ways tied to creation. They're gods of different elements, whereas God is God of all the elements. The Christian God is God of all the elements. So right there we have a mode of manifestation in which God says that he's revealed to us through the scriptures as something other than creation, while also being a part of it. So the emphasis of phenomenology and this approach to theology is that it shows how something appears, but also what appears. But its real strong, kind of sticking point, what it wants to emphasize is, again, how things appear to us, how they appear to our consciousness. So in its application to theology, he argues that God is disclosed to us, again, not as a being in the world, but in a distinct, non-objectifying way. So this kind of goes to what we've talked about in other podcasts about problem and mystery, that God is disclosed to us as a mystery, that is something that is intimately involved with us, that kind of encloses us, but not as something separated from us as a problem, something that we can detach from and examine, but something that we're already bound up in. And of course, there's the other idea of mystery as something partly revealed, partly non-revealed. And I think that idea that mystery is something that's revealed and is disclosed and concealed actually is because we're involved with it. I would say it's like sometimes the the closer you are to someone, sometimes you think the more you know about them, and therefore the more objective you are. But actually, you're actually less objective than sometimes somebody who's a third party. So I think partly why God is a mystery to us is not just his transcendence, but that we're too intimately bound up to see to see through the fog.
Is this related to, God saying, "I am that am," as opposed to being like the question of like what kind of being are you, and the response being like, "I'm being itself," being like, this is different in kind of a category. This is not like one among many. This is like the things that create the many.
Yeah, I would say yes, that disclosure is like the name par excellence of God. That is the best name because it's the name he gives himself, but then also it's a perfect description of his nature as his nature and his existence as a being that is not separated from that a being that's nature is his existence, and existence is his nature, and he's the only one like that. Again, what kind of being are you is that I am being, not what kind of being are you? I'm a supreme being, or even that I'm God in a lower sense or a pagan sense. It's I'm actually the cause of all being, and that's it right there, a distinction, and therefore kind of a phenomenology of God, that God appears to Moses as that which is being itself, as opposed to again a being in the cosmos. So this theology of disclosure is Sokolowski says is it takes a speculative form of theological reflection, but it's inspired by phenomenology. So phenomenology focuses on how these things present themselves to consciousness, and it kind of takes almost in a sense it takes a naive approach to consciousness, in that what we see we take as reality. It's different than idealism. It's not that our consciousness is focused on ideas. That's the emphasis behind the philosophical epistemology of idealism, is that it's in the name, idea, that our minds are oriented to our ideas about reality. But phenomenology actually, contrary I think to what some people think, is a very objective. It's that actually our consciousness is oriented towards, it intends, that means kind of what stands out, towards reality itself, towards being. So it's a form, in a sense of realism, which takes reality as objective. It's something outside of myself. I don't create it and I don't project it, but it's something real that my mind is interacting with. So the mind is oriented towards objective reality, and it's not mind ideas about reality. It's mind and then reality. So its goal then, the goal of phenomenology is to kind of uncover these essential patterns and structures that underlie the various modes of appearing that reality reveals to us. So theology of disclosure tries to bring out the structure of manifestation that is proper to what he calls Christian things. So he's going to make a distinction between the distinction between the theology of disclosure, which is the phenomenology we've been talking about, and the theology of Christian things. So the theology of Christian things is really, I guess, what we're most familiar with when we talk about theology. It's God, the sacraments, man, anything having to do with revelation, really. But the theology of disclosure is how Christian things are given to us. So it makes theology attentive to not just what is revealed, but how it's revealed, and our reception of those realities. So it's really focused on our consciousness and the distinctive ways that these things manifest themselves. So how God manifests himself to us, how he appears to us, how the sacraments appear to us, how the virtues appear to us. So it's not just, I guess, things in the physical sense, like a sacrament, but it can also be, I guess, more immaterial things like virtues. A virtue isn't really a thing in the world, but it's still something that appears to us when we see someone.
Still a phenomenon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. It's still a phenomenon. When somebody acts virtuous or vicious, it's something that you
respond to.
Yeah, it's something you respond to. It's something you can see. It's something you can.
So phenomenology is essentially like the study of phenomenon, and like I think what you're pointing out before was that like this is kind of taking for granted that these things exist, because if they're phenomenon, then we're going to ask why are they appearing that way, and we're not really going to ask whether they exist or not because they are appearing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the phenomenology of something like sacraments is like, why water? Why is water relevant to us from a phenomenological sense? What is our relationship with water? And not necessarily asking whether it's efficacious and it's actually taking away sins and that kind of debate, or the speculations around those theological debates, but it's more asking, why is it water and not lava?
Mm-hmm.
What is the theology of disclosure? Why are these things being disclosed in this way? Why is there oil? Why do we have to say words to a priest? And all of that has phenomenological relevance as to why we say words out loud in any sense. And so it seems like it's investigating those types of relationships than a different type.
Right. And it's not speculative in the sense that sometimes it wonders, well, could God have done it another way?
Right.
As you said, it's more, well, this is the reality that we have before us. So how does this reality appear to us?
Right.
Would Jesus have become incarnate if we had never fallen? That's an interesting speculative question, but that's not really in the realm of phenomenology. Mm-hmm. It's like he didn't. That's not what happened. This is what happened. You said we use water. I mean, I think you could speculate about why water is important, but that's different than a question of why did he institute the sacrament at all or something, or like could he not have instituted the sacrament? That's a different level of speculation. This is, again, why is it relevant? This is what we have revealed to us. This is the Christian thing. So how is it made manifest to the believing Christian?
Right. And what does that mean for our relationship? Like, what does water mean to us when it relates to death, entrance into a communal body, life, etc.? Like, all of that is like, you start to tease out those things when you start to deep dive into the phenomenology of water. And he's like, oh, well, so the reason why baptism is using water is because of all of these truths about God that are then also revealed in other things that relate to water. And then you're like building a whole network.
Right, exactly. So all these different appearances are saying something about essential truth.
Right.
Like you said, about God. And I think underlying all this is the assumption that God creates human nature. God creates humanity, and so he creates it with these different manifestations in mind.
Right.
If that makes sense. Like,
it's
this
like
is
related to the logoi, incarnational idea, sacramental idea, that everything it like has these things that are related to God in them.
Right. So since he knows human nature and he knows how to communicate then these realities to human nature, it's like, okay, so what phenomenon are going to correspond? Again, it's not simply just divine will, that God just wants it to be this way and that's the way it is. There has to be some, or we would understand it as some logic, like I said, some sort of logos between God, humanity, and why he chose this median. Like there's a principle of intelligibility, maybe? There's a word I'm looking for, but God communicates in a way he knows that will be most intelligible to man. Right. And because he knows how these phenomena will appear to us. So I briefly touched on it before, but I think there's this idea sometimes about phenomenology that it's kind of strictly relative. It's just how it appears to the individual. And so we're really just talking about individual psychology, and it could be otherwise. It's like, well, you experience reality one way, I experience it another way. Right. Who's really to say what's true? And phenomenology insists that there is an objective reality, but it does appear to the individual perhaps in various ways, or it appears to different individuals in various ways, but still maintaining an objective grounding. One of the projects of Christian phenomenology is really the insistence that ancient philosophy asked, what is it? Starting with Socrates, what is virtue? What is justice? But then the modern philosophical question is, how is it experienced? So phenomenology is trying to bring together these two realities. So what is it and how is it experienced? And so the what is it is really kind of the objective nature, but then how is it experienced can be subjective. But again, if you detach it from what it's investigating, then it seems like it's just about individual psychology. So tying that to the theology of disclosure is that theology is not just a report about how this person experiences the Christian faith or how they feel about the Christian faith, but it's how the things of faith must be presented. So it attempts to state the essential distinctions, it says, about what must occur in the emergence of Christian belief. So it shows how Christian things are differentiated from nature. Again, how God is not a being among other beings, how natural virtue is different than faith, the supernatural virtues. And it really tries to actually get theological thinking closer to life, I think is a main element of this kind of theology. It tries to show us that since we live our lives in the way that things appear to us, but the things that appear to us are still objective. They're still external to us. Again, the feeling I have, or the experience I have of the sacrament of baptism, is not my idea of the sacrament of baptism, but it's the actual mystery and embodiment of the water, the words, the oil, everything that's involved in it. So that part, again, remains still an objective reality.
To which you would have to conform to, right? Because then there's a discrepancy. It's like, well, I have my own hierarchy that I'm projecting or that I'm viewing the world through, and all of that's real to a certain extent. But then insofar as does not conform with how things actually are is where you get tension. And then who's to say that my interpretation versus your interpretation is right? And it's like, watch how it plays out.
Yeah. No, there is again, that objective reality that you can test your theory against, right. I think is what you're saying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that the results of that will bear out the facts about whether or not.
Yeah, I think about the way Pageau talks about people downtrodden things like hierarchy or even the notion of God and be like, there's no real like hierarchy, or hierarchy's bad, and then he's always like flipping it with like, you already exist and act in a way that you think hierarchy is necessary. In fact, you wouldn't be able to get out of bed if you didn't believe hierarchy was necessary. Like the reason why you get up and go do a thing versus another thing means that you're hierarchically putting something in a higher spot of value. So he's always like bringing it from, it seems like, the debate about whether it's real or not down to a natural, embodied, phenomenological. It's like this thing is occurring to you as a phenomenon already, and it kind of like awakens you to that. Like, oh, I'm already in relationship with the phenomenon of hierarchy, and I didn't know it.
Right.
And then you have to reconcile with that.
Again, that's the naivete of phenomenology, is It just takes the stance that you already live in such a way.
That's right.
You already live in such a way that you believe, you take it for granted that these things are real. And it's only when you move into a different mode of thinking, you move into an idealist mode, that you think, oh no, I don't think about reality. I think about my ideas of reality.
Right.
It's like, okay, but as soon as you stop thinking that way, you just assume that the world is real. So that's a big tenet of the school of phenomenology. Is it's called a return to the things in themselves, just the way things in themselves present themselves to you.
Right.
That the appearances is a big phenomenological word, and appearance really just means how it's how it appears to your flesh is kind of the word. So how it's experienced in your embodiment, because it's not even that the world corresponds to your mind alone. It corresponds to your being, your body, and your mind.
Yep.
Again, that's part of the example of baptism is, yes, there's something mentally going on. You're assenting to the faith and you're thinking about the event and you're thinking about the ritual, the words, but you're also getting wet.
That's right.
Like there's water, physical water poured on your skin that you can feel. And so how does this whole event appear?
Right.
In totality? All those senses, really. Yeah. So this theology of disclosure, I think this is a very interesting point that Sokolowski makes, is he thinks that it's very important to develop in this particular time. That the idea of appearances that I've just described has always been an issue. Humanity has always thought about this. Philosophical schools since the Middle Ages have thought about this. And oftentimes in the modern world, after we kind of moved out of the medieval period, I think just I guess a sidebar here, when you think about the medieval period and you look at some of the definitions of reality, if you work in that school, it makes perfect sense. But if you're a modern thinker at all, it doesn't. So one of Aquinas' definitions of truth is the mind's correspondence to reality. But if you call into question the mind
right.
and reality, that definition is no good. Because what do you mean correspondence to whose reality? Right. According to whose mind? So that definition is questioned by modern philosophy but how is it experienced? How does your mind experience reality?
Quid est veritas.
There you go.
Started a long time ago.
Right. Yeah. The first skeptical philosopher, Pontius Pilate. Although, what a misunderstood quote, but that's still good. Still good. But we move into the modern period and we think appearances are now interpreted as merely subjective or psychological. And, they're separated from not only philosophy and theology, but even that milieu, the medieval milieu that took for granted certain truths. Again, there's a cultural heritage that when you say truth, you know what I'm talking about. We're both Catholic. I don't really need to explain it. But if you were someone else, non-Catholic or maybe a thoroughly modernist person, you wouldn't understand what I'm saying.
Right.
And so in Sokolowski's mind, theology can and must use phenomenology not to update theology, but really to bring it to bear with this issue of how do I experience reality? Right. How do the things of theology disclose themselves? How do I experience them? How are they made manifest to me? So the study of appearances, absence, presence, these are all, kind of big phenomenological terms. We use them so that we can make it more possible for theology to kind of enter into the modern conversation about, what we know about consciousness, what we know about the mind, and I guess all the big all the big modern things, you know.
Yeah, it seems like someone like Jordan Peterson, but specifically Jordan Peterson, has been like sounding the alarm on that one, in terms of, I don't know what you mean by faith. I don't know what you mean by God. That whole like discourse. It seems like the hill he's gonna die on is like waking people up to the fact that we are not using the same words.
Yep.
Like we just have to recognize that we have to reevaluate what we mean by these things, and that has like consequential ramifications, broadly speaking.
Yeah, I think
it's kind of the Nietzschean "God is dead" thing of like you've got rid of the term, the idea of what you think God is, all of that. Like we're just not talking about the same thing, and that we're gonna have to that puts you in an existential point that I don't think a lot of us are aware of.
Yeah, I think Peterson. I recently heard a podcast, and their critique of Peterson was that he reduces everything to the psychological, which is also the critique against Jung. Which when you read a lot of Jung, it's like Peterson. Some people don't think he's a great Jungian. I don't know. I'm not going to comment on that. I don't have the kind of expertise. But there is a lot of similarities between the critiques against him and Jung. It's kind of crazy. But this claim that Peterson and Jung reduce everything to the psychological, I think their answer would be what reality is experienced apart from the psychological. So I'm not reducing anything to psychology. It's just you experience reality through your psychology, through your mind. So, when you have, even Father Victor White makes this point, so when you have a religious experience, you have a psychological experience. That's not to say it's only, that it doesn't have any sort of spiritual value.
Right.
But the fact remains, unless you are in the upper end of the unitive way, if you're in spiritual marriage, when God infuses knowledge directly into your soul, apart from your faculties, everything you experience is through the medium of your mind.
Right. Are we incarnational or not? Like, what are we talking about here?
Right. So it's when Jung or Peterson says you have an experience of God and this can be understood psychologically, it's like, are they saying something not true? Or perhaps this idea that God is a psychological construct? It's like, but even then, it's like, well, we do understand God through language, words, and symbols. Like, we do understand God in a mediated sense. Like, the phenomenon of him has to be, again, apart from the beatific vision. And, I mean, even in the, unitive way, like I said, like, God communicates directly to your soul, not through your faculties. But even then, it's not the beatific vision, because then you'd be dead.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
it's like there's always going to be, like I said, there's always some sort of incarnate element to this, and some sort of filtering.
Yeah, it's like if you equate, it's almost like, at what point do you say just? Because the critique of Peterson and Jung seems to be, he's making religion out to be just psychological, and is the whole project of psychology to be a reduction, to do away with religion and saying like it is just a projection of the mind and nothing else. And then when we talk about psychology, what are we talking about? Are we talking about like the phenomenon of these things appearing to our minds and consciousness, which is like almost ineffable at this point of being able to try to describe it? Or are we just talking about brain matter? Like physical things, So yeah, it's like there seems like there's a skepticism about the sciences because they have a history of saying it's just psychological, it's just brain matter, and therefore can reduce everything else. But the response is not to disregard psychology or science, brain matter. Like, we have brain matter, we are psychological beings, and we do believe in the incarnation. And so that means these things actually are all part of the same thing of us as human beings. Like, we have brain matter, we have a psychology, we are religious beings. And so when we see God, it is a psychological encounter that is also religious. So we have the both ends. It's just hard to not fall into the trap of wanting to reject it because other people have used it as a tool against it.
Yeah. And I guess, to try to steelman the other point, I think that's maybe what people are saying is either A, they're worried about science overstep, or they're overreach and making claims that they really can't make,
right.
or B, it's the idea that religion is reduced to a psychological projection,
right?
Which I don't think Peterson's ever made that claim.
Yeah,
but
it is dangerous. I think it is right to point out on the side of the religious that there does seem sometimes to be a tendency to be anti-science, because of its tool to negate religion. But you don't want to be almost dualistic and being like, well, the incarnational aspects of it don't matter. What really matters is this other thing and the ethereal. And so like there's a danger on both ends that we really have to like reckon with when we're talking about phenomenology and psychology. It's like these things are actually in the embodied person. So it's a huge both end that we really have to reconcile with, or else we're just as bad as using it as a tool against religion.
Right. Which I think with Sokolowski, his Theology of Disclosure, someone like Father Victor White, and Jung to some degree, I think there will be a greater emphasis, and what I hope to do throughout this podcast is elucidate, kind of expand upon this idea that we can, in fact, look at phenomenon in a psychological way that doesn't reduce it, and also so it doesn't reduce religion to a psychological process, and also it respects the ability for, I guess, supernatural phenomenon to appear as well.
Right.
That it can be something out of the natural, out of the ordinary, but also recognizing that when you go to Mass and you do have a religious experience, that is something that is manifested through your body,
right,
and your mind,
right. It really is about that personal disposition, because like we talked about before about having like a sacramental view of the world, a symbolic life. If I like the way I interact with water on a day-to-day basis, like I'm always thinking about its kind of like hierarchical value in my life. That like, yeah, it's refreshing and it's like it gives me hydration, but it's also purifying. It's also related to baptism. It's also death and renewal. And so that is my relationship with water. And so when somebody says to me, yeah, baptism is just pouring water on a baby's head, like I'm almost immune to that, because I don't relate to water as just water. Mm-hmm. Even water outside the sacrament is something different than just water to me. And so if you have that symbolic life, you're already in an atmosphere, kind of like the medievals, where there's already a givenness to the connectedness to God in all of the things. And so you wouldn't have to fear something like psychology or phenomenology speaking about these things in this way, because you're like, of course, these things are all pointing to Christ. Mm-hmm. And so it's really getting back to that symbolic life, that the embodied reality, incarnational idea that kind of sets up an immunity against science, quote unquote, big science trying to take down religion. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right. Once you get into that sacramental mode of thinking, then God is revealed in many different ways.
Right.
Perhaps even through dreams. Mm-hmm. That something like dreams, something like water, something like your psychology, your embodiedness, that it happens not just. I guess your experience of God doesn't happen in a vacuum.
That's right.
Apart from embodiment, apart from any other experience, and it doesn't just happen in the miraculous either. What we're trying to figure out here, what we're trying to look at, it's probably a better way to say it, is how these divine realities that are real and they're something separate from us, but also something that in that sense, objective, but they're also something that reveal themselves in a particular way to our psychology. So I guess to wrap up here, there's another quote from Jung. He says that his standpoint is exclusively phenomenological. That is, it is concerned with occurrences, events, experiences, in a word, facts. So this is something that is very contentious in Jungian thought. Is, he takes subjective experiences, he takes, I guess, conscious experiences as kind of irreducible. You can't really argue with them. And again, I think this is where the idea of reducing everything to psychological, Jung would say, if you have an experience, if you have a psychological experience, it's a fact. Like you had that experience. And so if someone comes to me and says, I've had a religious experience of God, you can't tell them no, because they did. And so the idea that it's like, well, you're just reducing it to the psychological, like that doesn't make it unreal. I think that is sometimes what underlies the critique, is what you're saying is it's not real. It's just subjective. But I think for Jung, it would be actually, it's very real. And, it would take some philosophical reworking for Jung, but that's what the theology of disclosure is working with. This idea that occurrences, events, experiences, the things of Christian faith appear to us, and we take them as facts, as realities, as objective. But now we wonder, how do we take them that way?
Right.
How do we experience them? And that's a project that I'm going to keep working on. And we're going to keep checking in on the Monday Muse. Not that the Monday Muse will only be about this, but...
Yeah. It'll be seen through that lens for sure. I feel like this is a good encapsulation of how we're looking at all the things we're talking about on the podcast anyway.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to talk about it today, is because I think it'll provide a bit of a foundation for some other things I want to talk about, about God. Jordan Peterson was asked about, his conception of God, so what do we understand? How do we understand the conception of God? How does that appear to us? And in other topics like that. So.
Perfect.